and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Right-On Optics. Right-On is bringing you high-quality glass at a great value. I use and trust their scopes, binoculars, and red dot sights, and you can too with their unconditional lifetime warranty. If you ever have a problem with their gear, they will replace it, not repair it. Finish up your next build and keep a little extra cash on hand for ammo so you can actually go out and shoot that thing. Find your next optic at rightonoptics.com. This episode is also brought to you by Mantis. Mantis is a firearms training tool that tracks the movement in your gun so you can step up your performance with good data and feedback. Not only does it help you stay accountable and make training more enjoyable and cost-effective, it also works in dry fire so you can train at home. I swear by dry fire training, and I use the Mantis every single time. If your shooting will have real-life consequences, use the Mantis to take your shooting to the next level. Get one and join our training group in the Mantis app. You can find them at mantisx.com. So every once in a while, police officers will go to a murder scene and have themselves like an actual mystery. You know, the kind you see in the movies, the whodunit. It's not real common because normally it's some sort of domestic violence thing, or it's like a gang-related thing, or there is some obvious motive, and that generally points you towards a suspect, and it's pretty clear-cut. But this one starts like right out of a movie scene, and it's absolutely terrifying. This entire event is just terrifying. So February 3rd, 2013, it was Super Bowl Sunday. Police officers go to a check welfare call. They see someone slumped over in a car. It ends up being a male and female who were murdered in their car in the parking lot of their condo in Irvine. Irvine is not a very high crime, this pretty nice area, affluent area. And as they're investigating this, they're looking at what it was, right? There was a whole bunch of bullets fired into this car, close range. They counted like 14 shell casings on the ground. It was clearly a targeted sort of ambush scenario. This was a couple, male and female couple, that didn't seem to have any enemies. It didn't look like a robbery. They still had all their valuables and jewelry and things like that. There was no like indication of like a road rage or any kind of like crashing of cars, anything like that. There were no criminal histories on these people. Nothing really that can lead investigators to what the F just happened. And it was Super Bowl Sunday, so a lot of people were watching the game and stuff, but people were also up kind of late at night. This occurred in the late evening hours, but police officers 911 didn't get the call until like hours into this, right? It had happened a couple hours prior, and so they're like, who fired 14 rounds at this car at a condo, apartment complex essentially, and no one heard the shots. No one called this in. Like, this is weird. So that's kind of how the story started, right? The next day, Monday, February 4th, National City, which is a smaller city down kind of a suburb of San Diego near the border, National City PD gets a call behind a business in a dumpster. Some guy finds a bunch of LAPD uniforms and equipment. They found initially it wasn't just uniforms, it was like body armor and stuff. And so they thought, well, that doesn't seem like trash. That seems like something that someone should get called about. So police officers go, and again, this is at the time seemingly completely unrelated. Police officers go to this dumpster, they go through this gear, they find an LAPD uniform, it's got the name Dorner on it. They look through a notebook that's with all this gear, and they see Dorner's name and badge number, and they see the name Evans and another badge number. And in investigating this, they call LAPD and go, hey, we found this uniform. It's kind of weird. What's the deal? They reach out to this Evans person, Teresa Evans, who was a sergeant at the time with the LAPD. And they go, hey, this is so-and-so from National City, and we found these uniforms, and there was a notebook, and your name and this other name is on there. We're just curious if you have any idea why. There's a bunch of equipment here. Did you have some stuff stolen, anything like that? She's like, no. They're like, do you know the name Dorner? She's like, yeah, I remember that guy. He was kind of crazy. So it turns out this guy Dorner, Christopher Dorner, was a cop for LAPD for a short period of time. He was also a Navy officer, and there was about a year period where he was off on a deployment. He came back from a deployment and went through some field training, and this Teresa Evans, who was his FTO at the time, essentially was involved in him getting fired from the LAPD. So he worked for LAPD for just a short period of time before he got deployed. And so he had to kind of pick up training and go back through some training before he can be out on his own. And when he came back, he was just kind of not a stellar performer. He was having problems with seeing racism in every call, and he was just kind of belligerent about things. And he noted to his FTO, Teresa Evans, about how he was going to sue the LAPD because of some stuff that happened in the academy before he left and all these things. And it was just kind of a problem, just wasn't doing well. And ultimately, he files a complaint against Officer Evans at the time. It was Officer Evans, alleging that she assaulted like a homeless person or something. Ended up being investigated. It was determined that it was completely false, and compiled with all these performance issues that he was having, essentially his untruthfulness and what they determined to be a false report or false allegation led to him being fired. So Evans remembers this guy and is like, he's off, something's weird. She always assumed that like he was going to come after him and stuff. Now this is like 6 years prior to this seemingly unrelated double homicide that happens in Irvine, right? So taking it back to the National City thing, she gets this call. They're asking about these uniforms. She doesn't know anything about it. She tells them like, yeah, I remember that Dorner guy, kind of crazy, weird. She thinks about it. She gets kind of weirded out. She's like, this is like just the heebie-jeebies, right? Like this, hearing that name brings up all these things. So the next day, she's starting her shift. She kind of reflects on that a little bit. A day goes by. She's starting her shift, her patrol shift as a sergeant now, and she overhears some officers talking about this double homicide that happened in Irvine over the weekend. And turns out that double homicide was the daughter and fiance of a former LAPD captain. This former LAPD captain, Randall Kwan, was also Dorner's attorney when, he was the one who represented Dorner when he was going through his proceedings to be terminated. And that's when things started to kind of get weird, right? So she's thinking about this a little bit, and she talks to one of her, one of the people that she works with, and she goes, hey, let me run this by you real quick. Like, this could be completely unrelated, but I'm hearing now that this double homicide was this dude's daughter and fiance, and I got this call yesterday morning about some uniforms being found in a dumpster with my name on a notepad and him. Like, that can't be related, right? Like that seems a little crazy. And they're like, not crazy enough. Like, you should probably say something. So she calls Irvine PD. It's late at night. She calls and she's like, hey, I just want to run this by you. This might sound a little bit crazy, but let me just let you know what happened. They take some notes. They look it over. The next morning, the Irvine PD homicide sergeant or whoever comes in, and she's got this name written down. And hey, Christopher Dorner, why don't you look this guy up? This is what we heard. Kind of this weird connection, maybe. Let's look into it a little bit. Well, so now they start doing their research. It's Wednesday morning, and this is when one of the investigators, in searching his name, comes across a Facebook post that Christopher Dorner wrote. And it's this sprawling manifesto about his vendetta against the LAPD and who he's targeting, the entire hierarchy that was used against him to be fired. And, he's essentially seeking revenge and justice and whatever for all the wrongs that have been done, right? And so now it's like, oh boy. Now it's right out of the scene from a movie. So some things about Dorner. I mentioned that when he came back from military service and he was riding with Evans, he said that he was going to sue the LAPD for these things. And he tended to see racism in kind of every interaction that he had. People who testified in the case against him and essentially who spoke about him and knew of him used certain things to describe him. They said things like he was an injustice collector, like he kind of kept tabs on people that had wronged him in one way or the other. One person noted that he had some kind of a hero syndrome, which essentially is, this idea that you create this crisis that you can be the hero to solve, or, basically that you're creating these scenarios where you can be the fixer, right? Or the hero. And those can be big or small. You might know people who have this kind of complex where it's like this, look at me, I need a gold star. But also on a larger scale, on a more psychotic scale, it would be like you set up a crime that doesn't, you basically stage a crime that you're going to solve. And I'm not saying he did that specifically, but that he had that kind of personality, right? That was the thing that people noted about him. There was an old friend of his from high school who had stayed in touch with Dorner for a long time. And he said things like, he was the sort of person who always thought people were out to get him. And after he got fired, he was depressed. He seemed to be struggling. And the friend said that he purchased a bunch of suppressors. He was living in Vegas at the time. He bought a bunch of suppressors, a quote unquote silencer for firearms. And this was one of the things that during the double homicide in Irvine, the detectives had thought about, how did no one call this in? What are we dealing with here? Because this was a close range ambush. I mean, these people were lit up. They were executed. This was 14 rounds close range while they're sitting in their car, buckled in and everything. This is an assassination. And if no one heard it or call it in, were they using a suppressor? What was the deal? So that was something that kind of came up. So this guy that he went to high school with says, yeah, he was buying suppressors. He was just kind of despondent. He was, thought everyone was out to get him, and abruptly kind of cut ties with this friend of his. Dorner did. Dorner cut ties with him. He sent him a text and he said, he resented him for all these things. He didn't come to his college graduation and all these. And so Dorner kind of cut this friend off, and the friend was like, all right, man, you do you, I guess. Right. During the academy, he went to the police academy. He took a long time to get through, what should have been a 6 month or so, 5-6 month academy took him 13 to get through. At one point he shot himself in the hand accidentally during the police academy. I guess he got in some fights with his classmates. There was a point where he choked and or assaulted one of his classmates, which to me seems like the sort of thing. I don't know how you survive that if you're in a police academy, but I don't know. I wasn't there. So there were some signs about Dorner, maybe in hindsight, that were hey, these were warnings unheeded. If you remember that book, Warnings Unheeded by Andy Brown, we had Andy Brown on the podcast. He talked about a Air Force airman who had a lot of kind of warning signs like this that ended up doing an active killer event at the Fairchild Air Force Base Hospital. So again, in hindsight, at the very least, some warning signs about this dude that were kind of weird, right? So double homicide happens, National City event happens, the dots get connected, LAPD gets notified that, hey, this double homicide, turns out this dude was targeting this former captain of yours, Randall Kwan. He made threats against his family and his daughter turned up dead here in Irvine with her fiance. And in his manifesto that he posted on Facebook, he's basically declaring war on LAPD, right? And so they stand up a little command center. They get all these people involved. They start making a list of all the people that he was threatening in this manifesto of his. It was the people who were on the Board of Rights who heard the case. That, like I said, the whole chain of command that essentially sanctioned the termination in his eyes, his lawyer, their families. He said stuff in there about white officers who victimize minorities, black officers who belittle white subordinates, Latinos who victimize other Latinos, lesbians who degraded men. I mean, it was just on and on and on. So they started they started a whiteboard and made this list, right? Initially had something like 30 people on it. It grew to like 77. And they were like, we got to get, we got to do something. So they started sending out these protective details. They started calling cops in, and at the very least, they went and put, a 2-officer unit out in front of the houses of these people and started making phone calls and notifying them of what was going on. And like, hey, heads up, this guy, look out, right? So that all started Wednesday afternoon. And kind of working into the evening where they're trying to get all these protective details stood up. Obviously, Teresa Evans, who was kind of the one who connected the dots in this particular case, was high on the list of targets. They call her. They say, hey, this is a credible threat. We think this is legit. Stay mobile. Don't go home. Now, I want you to think about just for a second. I've been a police officer for coming up on 13 and a half years. And there's like the things that you're paranoid about, the things that you think about. And then there's like the big scary. Now, this is not the sort of thing that happens all the time, right? But like, just imagine that there's a credible threat to your life and you get that phone call that's like, hey, this is the real deal. Stay mobile. Don't go home. What do you do and say to your family? Where do you go? I mean, is there stuff you need from your house? I mean, who's going to take care of the animals? There's a lot to to deal with if you got that kind of phone call, right? So over the course of that afternoon, over 200 cops get spun up and they're pulling people from everywhere. They're calling people in from off duty. They're pulling people off of, different investigative assignments and whatever. And they're sending these protective details out. Teresa Evans gets, she meets up with a protective detail away from her house. They go and set up security at her place. She ends up getting taken to like a hotel, like a secret location, a safe house, if you will. And this is kind of all going on through the night while they're starting to put the pieces together on this. So at some point, this makes it to the news that, hey, this is the thing that's occurring. And Wednesday night, late at night, there is a repo man at a gas station in Corona. Corona is a small city in Riverside County. It's about, I don't know. It's probably, it really depends on traffic and stuff, but maybe like an hour kind of south and east of LA. With traffic, it could take longer, but if you were late at night, that's probably how long it would take to get there. There's a repo man who's at a gas station and he spots a truck that looks familiar to him and a guy that looks familiar to him. And he starts to realize like, oh, that's the guy that they were looking for. And he was getting ready. He went and parked, across the street to kind of just sit off and watch for a minute while he tried to call 911 and say like, hey, I saw the guy. And while he's doing that, there's an LAPD car with 2 officers in it that happens to just be in the same area. And he goes and flags them down and says, hey, that guy that you're looking for just left. And while he's talking with them, the truck drives by. Dorner's truck, it was a Nissan Titan, drives by and he's like, that's him. And so the LAPD guys, they jump in their car, they go try to catch up to it. It's getting on the freeway and they try to tail it and see if it's the right car. And they're trying to call it in and get more resources. Now these LAPD guys, LAPD in with a reasonable amount of haste, just was sending cops to go out to these protective details. And that's what these two guys were. They were on their way to go set up at one of the potential targets' house to be his protective detail, his or hers. And when LAPD made the decision to send these people out, they're like, look, I don't know, these agencies might not have the resources to send people there. It's going to take time to explain to them what's going on. We don't know how they're going to handle it. Like, we just want to get uniform presence out in front of these houses, just if nothing else as a deterrent, and to kind of harden the target while we get organized here. It was a stopgap measure. It was a hasty thing. They were just like, just hurry up and get there and we'll figure it out later. Right. So LAPD's out there, these two guys in a patrol car, their radios don't work out there, and so they're using their phones and stuff to try to call this in. And while they're trying to tail this car, Dorner gets off the freeway. They follow him off the freeway, and Dorner is waiting right off the off-ramp outside of his truck and ambushes these cops, right? Fires at him with a .223 rifle, disables their car, blows out the radiator and stuff, disables the car. One of the officers gets grazed in the head, but they're otherwise okay. He gets back in his car and takes off, but their car is disabled. They're getting on their phones trying to call us into 911 and explain what was going on, so you can assume there is a bit of a gap, right? He's got like a head start now, and they give a direction of travel. They say, hey, this is what happened. Boom. But now we have, essentially shooting number 2 has occurred. Just a couple minutes later, and about 10 miles away, there's a Riverside PD police car sitting at a red light in an intersection, and it's a rookie officer and his FTO, field training officer. And they're sitting there at the red light, and Dorner comes kind of blazing through the intersection ends up right next to him, gets out close range again over the hood of another car, ambushes these two dudes. Nothing connected to LAPD. This is just at this point, like, I don't know, F the police, I guess. This is one of those like scary sitting at a red light scenarios that's really impossible to counter or do anything about when you're more or less trapped at an intersection and don't see it coming. The FTO, Michael Crane, was killed. Andrew, I'm gonna butcher the trainee's, the rookie officer's name. Andrew Tachias, Tachias. I'm gonna say Tachias. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. I'm sorry. He survived, but he was pretty beat up. He took some pretty serious injuries. There was a cab driver sitting at the intersection across the other side. He watched the whole thing go down. The truck, Dorner gets back in his truck. He takes off. He goes over to help. He's kind of overwhelmed. He picks up the radio for the officer and keys it for him. The officer, Tachias, says, hey, officer down, shots fired, whatever. They get help. He waits for officers to arrive, and they both get whirled off to the hospital. Again, Michael Crane is pronounced dead, and Tachias is pretty badly wounded, but ultimately survives. Shooting number 3. So this is all going down, kind of overnight, that Wednesday night. The AM PM, the gas station thing where he was spotted is about 1 o'clock in the morning, just after 1 o'clock in the morning. So in that 1 to 2 o'clock hour is when this whole thing goes down. Later that night, or I guess early Thursday morning, there's some other things that happen now that word of those shootings are spreading. And we're going to cover that as kind of a tangent here, because there's a lot to talk about in terms of what happened in Torrance and LA, in the LA area, I guess. As you can imagine, law enforcement across Southern California at this point is on high alert, and tensions are high and things are scary, right? Because this isn't just some guy. Like, this guy knows police policy. He knows how, radios work. He knows how police tactics are. He knows, he's got training. He's got, this is not your everyday bad guy, right? And it seems that he is hiding around, ambushing cops and their loved ones And so people are a little, rightfully, a little on edge, right? Now, before I get into the other officer-involved shootings that happen, there's something that happens about 40 minutes after that Riverside shooting, and maybe it's a coincidence, but it's hard to know for sure. A wallet was found in the road in San Diego, and it was just found in the middle of the roadway, had a photo ID of Dorner and a badge that didn't belong to him, and it's not clear if that was something that was ditched when he threw the clothing in the dumpster days prior, or if it was something he did as kind of to deliberately throw investigators off, or maybe it was just abandoned there another time, and who knows? It's really unclear. But there was a point overnight, Wednesday night, probably around 10 p.m. before the shootings happened, where an 81-year-old man who was sitting in his boat, which was in a dock down in San Diego, was confronted by Dorner at gunpoint, and Dorner wanted basically a ride to Mexico. And essentially it didn't work out. The 81-year-old's like, well, that's not going to work. Like, here, take my car. The guy's like, I can't be seen on the roads. And he got tied up and left there, and Dorner took off. So for whatever reason, he wasn't able to get a boat away from this 81-year-old man. Something happened where like he cut the line off the mooring line off the dock, and maybe got caught in a propeller and disabled the boat. I don't know, but he unsuccessfully tried to steal a boat from an elderly man and tied him up and left without getting the boat. And that happened probably around 10 p.m. By the time the old man got freed and was able to call that in, it was another thing that kind of drew the trail of Dorner south. And so a little while later, a few hours later, is when these shootings happened in Corona, Riverside. And so it's like, where is this guy even going? I mean, you can imagine the fog and friction that comes with this, in addition to everyone being on edge. And so what I'm trying to do here is build a little bit of empathy for what these officers are dealing with, because what happens next is a really, really big problem. Okay. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, a call comes in from a citizen about a truck that might or might not be Dorner's getting off of a freeway in Torrance. Torrance is, I guess you could say, like a suburb of LA, a little bit south of LA, coastal town, coastal city. And the truck was heading in the direction of one of the protectees. So there's a couple LAPD officers that were doing one of the protection details at this house. And this call basically suggests that a truck maybe matching Dorner's description is coming towards them, right? So it ends up being a Toyota Tacoma, which is not a Nissan Titan. And it is occupied not by Dorner, who is a large black man, but by two Hispanic women, ages 71 and 46, and they're delivering newspapers. Now, it is a law enforcement truth that if a call comes out and the vehicle is a, white Ford F-150, or just pick whatever it is, a silver Toyota Corolla, or, whatever, pick any car, a purple, PT Cruiser, I don't know, whatever car it is that you're looking for, you're suddenly going to see 1,000 of them on the street. So it's just like a normal thing, right? That you have to rule out cars that you see on the road. And just because it's a pickup truck doesn't make it Dorner, right? So Nissan Titan, Toyota Tacoma, not the same thing. So somehow, and for reasons that are outside of my comprehension, the officers end up confronting this truck, who, you can imagine, anytime I've worked those late night, early morning hours, and you see the newspaper delivery people going around, they drive kind of erratic, right? So it does look suspicious. And it's not an uncommon thing to see this car that's driving all funky around a neighborhood doing circles and stuff. And you go and you stop them and you're like, oh, okay, got it. Newspaper guy. Carry on, So they see this truck. It's probably driving erratic. It is a pickup truck. Somehow, again, beyond my comprehension, they confront this truck and open fire, right? 8 officers open fire over this truck. There's over 100 rounds fired, and the grandmother is shot. And they take these 2 women into custody at gunpoint after the shooting. Not even sure how that went down. I could tell you there was obviously a hefty lawsuit in the aftermath of all of this. But that's a big problem, right? Like, just because we're on edge and just because there's a big scary thing happening and some dude is out there hunting us, like, you still have to be a professional. So, I get it. They're on edge. They're hunting a cop killer, but Jesus, like, not okay, right? Another incident a short distance away, this was also in Torrance, but it was a Torrance PD event. They stopped this Honda Ridgeline, which is kind of like one of these crossover pickup truck kind of things. And the driver was released, and another Torrance PD car like crashes into it that was apparently maybe on his way to the LAPD incident. I don't know. And shots get fired into the cab of that truck. Now, the driver of that truck was like a white guy, surfer dude. He wasn't hit by gunfire, but he was clearly shot at. Again, not sure how that went down. But remember, we talked about this when I did the debrief of the UPS shooting in Miami that happened in, I think, 2019. That was an episode we did earlier this year. You have to be a professional. You're accountable for those rounds. And it doesn't matter if you're at risk. You don't get to give that up, right? So big problem. All right. So couple shootings occur overnight. In those early morning hours, we have these 2 officer-involved shootings towards unrelated third parties. Big deal. So that's Thursday morning. That takes us into Thursday morning. Now, that next day, early Thursday morning and kind of after those shootings, they find Dorner's truck in Big Bear, and it's been torched. This portion of the investigation was handled by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. Big Bear is a mountain range kind of north and east of the San Bernardino Inland Empire area. This whole story is crazy because this is all like areas that I grew up in. Like I have family in Corona. I used to go to Big Bear like a couple times a year. So this is like home to me, which is just crazy. So there's a detective, Alex Collins. He's a San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department detective. He's on leave because he just recently had a baby. When this goes down, he has 2 brothers who are also deputies on the Sheriff's Department, the same department as him. One of the brothers is on their SWAT team. One of them is the patrol sergeant up in Big Bear. So, these mountain areas, a lot of times that are covered by a Sheriff's Department, it's San Bernardino County is a large county. It's like the largest county in the country. If depending on how you measure, I don't know if it's just land large or also population kind of thing, but it's big. So these mountain areas, you might have like a small portion of the Sheriff's Department assigned up into those areas because they're obviously smaller and not as busy as down in the cities and stuff. So one of the brothers calls Collins, who is a detective, and he's like, "Hey man, like, are you following this whole Dorner thing? I think we found his truck up here. And it's been torched. It was driven through looks like the lock to a gate was cut on a service road. The truck probably got stuck in the snow, it looks like. And so it was set on fire kind of hastily. And so considering that maybe this was going to be obviously they're hot on the trail of this guy potentially, but also as they're starting to investigate this truck, they're like, hey, this could be a setup. Like this guy could be up in the trees, up in the hills, waiting for us. And so they back out, they call SWAT, and they're going to do like an area search kind of thing where they're going to clear the mountain areas around this truck before they investigate any further. So Collins is on leave, but his brother is a patrol sergeant up in Big Bear. His other brother is on SWAT, who's going to go up there, and he's like, hey, like I gotta go help. And so they go up and they start this manhunt, this area search, this investigation over this truck that got burned in place. There was a whole bunch of guns and ammo that were found in this truck. And this search starts to kind of spin up over the course of all day Thursday. And by the end of Thursday, he's in the wind. They don't know where he's at. This is Mike, and I just want to jump in real quick to announce our new partnership with Brink Drones. Brink has created life-saving capabilities in a drone that can break windows, fly into houses and confined spaces, and even crash into things and stay in the air with advanced pilot assistance that does not use GPS. Brink drones are built in the USA. It has night vision and IR that can function in blacked out and zero light conditions. It can flip itself back over, and it is a flying cell phone with two-way communication and a live video feed. It can even carry and drop off items for hostage negotiators with the payload feature. Brink has a really cool and compelling heritage that came to be after the 1 October mass shooting at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, and they are committed in their mission to leverage technology to save lives. And I can tell you firsthand that their drones will do just that by flying into places that are too dangerous to risk human lives. If you work in public safety, your agency needs to see what this drone can do. Go check out Brink Drones at brinkdrones.com, or feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to tell you all about them. Again, that's Brink, BRINC, drones.com. The next day, Friday, was a law enforcement appreciation day at Snow Summit. Snow Summit's one of the ski resorts up in Big Bear, and they were having like this big event. And so one thought was like, well, was he coming up here to set up on this law enforcement appreciation day? Was that his target? Was that what he's going to do? So Collins gets involved in trying to help like locate this guy. There's a giant task force of agencies from all over that get involved in canvassing the mountain. They start going door to door. They talk to witnesses. They search all over the mountain for him. And as Thursday closes, it's gone cold. They're like, I have no idea where he's at. And this kind of goes on over the weekend. Over the weekend, LAPD does a few things. One is we haven't had any activity from him for a day or two. People are kind of freaking out. They're like, what's going on? What's going to happen next? Where's the story? You can imagine the media is having a frenzy at this point, talking about, this big scary thing that's going on and what's he doing? What's going to happen next? LAPD announces that, and this was kind of like a strategic move. They announced that they're going to reopen the investigation into his firing. I think the intent there was kind of like, hey, like he feels like he's been wrong. Maybe we'll maybe we'll slow him down a little bit by talking about like, we're going to look into this. Another big part of the problem is that the message from Dorner, he's talking about how the LAPD was corrupt and they did all these things. And there were people in society, in the communities out there, that the message from Dorner like resonated with them, and they kind of like, regarded him as some sort of vigilante hero. Like he's waging war on cops and holding them accountable. And, some of the claims that he was making about how like, I got fired because I spoke out against this, officer that assaulted some homeless guy and stuff. And, it seemed feasible, post Rodney King, post the whole Rampart scandal, post, all these things that have happened over the years with LAPD specifically, and just large departments and really police agencies everywhere. Like we've all had our moments. It seemed feasible to some people, and the message resonated with some people, even though it was crazy and outlandish, and he was obviously off his rocker. But you can imagine that this whole thing was just building and building and building and gaining momentum. And people they started to worry about like copycats, or people would join Dorner's cause and do that sort of thing. And so this is kind of going on and spinning up over the weekend. They announce a reward for him, saying, hey, like if anyone leads to the arrest, we'll give you $1 million kind of thing. And that generates a whole bunch of useless tips. Like, this is one of the things that whenever you take something to the media, it's a last resort sort of thing sometimes, because it can get you exactly what you need. Someone might point you in the right direction, but it can be hard to sift through the signal and the noise because, at that point, any pickup truck or any bald black guy is going to get probably called in as a possible sighting, which is obviously not the case, but people are thirsty for that money, and you've taken it to the media and given it the visibility. So that's going to happen. Anderson Cooper airs on CNN that his office received a package from Dorner days prior to the initial double homicide in Irvine. He got a challenge coin with a bullet hole through it and essentially like some kind of video or DVD that was supposed to vindicate him or something. Ended up not being anything useful, but kind of contributed to the story, got it up on CNN, and nothing really to come from that other than generated more of that, that hype, I guess. So as all that's going on, sort of in the background, you've got these manhunter types that are starting to come up with theories and figure out like, well, what is he doing? Where is he at? Where did he go? Does he have family? Did he have, is he hunkered down in the mountains somewhere? Is he hiding in a tree? Like, and they start to like really think about, is this guy really as badass as he seems? I mean, yeah, he pulled these murders off, but they were kind of just targets of opportunity in a lot of ways. And there's a little bit of foresight and planning for sure, but this dude tried to steal a boat from an 81-year-old and he couldn't even pull that off. I mean, we're talking about a guy who barely got through the police academy and shot himself in the hand. Like, what kind of person are we dealing with? And so one of the big theories was like, well, I don't think that he's like some survivalist that's like built an igloo in the snow and is hiding out somewhere. Like, he's got to be in a cabin. He's got to be somewhere. So Tuesday morning comes along. Back up in Big Bear, there's a elderly couple who run a small vacation, a condo resort kind of place. It's got 13 units, and it's up near the ski slopes up there in Big Bear. And they go to check out one of the units to do some repairs, and they're confronted by Dorner. Now, on Thursday, when the manhunt was really starting to spin up, the sheriff's deputies and whoever else involved in this search tried to go door to door and knock at every single unit. But in this particular case, the door was locked. There was no forced entry. There was really no reason to kick the door down and check it. They didn't feel like there was, sufficient cause to do that. You have to have a reason. You can't just go kick down every locked door. Though it might be tempting in scenarios like this, it's really not that simple. So they tried to make contact at every unit here, but there was no answer at this one, and it was locked up and secure. So that's probably how he got missed. Dorner essentially says like, hey, like, I've seen you working out there. You guys are good people. I don't want to kill you, but like, I know you know who I am. Like, I need to get out of here. Do you have a car? And they're like, yeah, take our car. It's a maroon Nissan Rogue. He takes the keys, he ties up and gags this elderly couple and takes off. The husband and wife are able to free themselves eventually and get the call out to 911. And that's about 15 to 30 minutes after he fled in their car. That was a little bit after noon. 12:23 was the 911 call that they got out. Again, this is Tuesday, late morning, early afternoon. That call makes it to Detective Collins and the other guys who are, working that side of it on the Big Bear front. And they, start thinking about like, okay, he's had 15 to 30 minutes. We need to shut down the mountain, right? Set up roadblocks. He's got to be coming off the hill somewhere. Let's lock it down. Another deputy, Jeremiah McKay, he's at the San Bernardino County Sheriff's office in Yucaipa, which is another kind of suburb of San Bernardino. They head up from down the hill to go set up these roadblocks, and he goes up to help. And the hunt is on. Right now we're looking for this maroon Nissan Rogue. We got a lead. We're back on his trail. So they start to swarm the mountain, right? They're looking for this car, and they spot him. The car is behind a couple of school buses. He ends up overtaking the school buses, and he's able to make a quick turn and evade the officers for a little while. The chase is on though, and they're hot on his ass. He ends up crashing into like a bank of snow, and he bails. They get up there behind him, and he took like a side road, right? So like there's like the main highway, and there's a turnoff that goes towards some, they're up in the woods, basically. They're up on the mountain somewhere. So it's not like all those roads go somewhere. So he crashes, he bails out of the car, he carjacks some other motorist, Dodge Ram now that he's in. And these officers that are speeding towards where the bailout occurred and trying to lock it down end up having Dorner come in right at him in this Dodge Ram and shoots at him, right? There's an exchange of gunfire between law enforcement and Dorner, and now a Dodge Ram. All this stuff starts to make it out on the radios and everything, and they're like, okay, he's got to be around here somewhere. He's back on this side road, and let's hunt for him. So they're looking for this car and trying to pin him down, essentially. Where it was last seen was near a cabin, and they are looking for the truck to try to figure out and get a clue on where this guy might have went, not knowing that Dorner had actually sent it down an embankment, and he was waiting inside this cabin, just kind of lying there and wait. Collins gets out of his car on foot near this cabin, and he's starting to kind of look around, try to see if he can find this truck. And he gets shot in the face from the cabin. And again, this is with a suppressed rifle, and they're getting heavy effective fire. They get pinned down behind a truck, a law enforcement truck, not the Dodge Ram, and he gets shot several times. Jeremiah McKay, who is one of the deputies that had rushed up the mountain to also help and try to find this, was also there with Collins. They take cover behind this truck and also ends up in the middle of this. McKay is trying to communicate with a helicopter to say where they're taking fire from. And while doing that, he's trying to lean out and talk to the helicopter and say, hey, we're taking fire from a cabin that's right off of, whatever direction from the helicopter. And he's tagged in the chest, kills him almost instantly. So Deputy McKay gets killed. Collins is wounded. They're kind of stuck behind this truck in the road outside of this cabin. In an effort to effect some sort of rescue, there's another deputy who tries to run out to move the truck as cover while another officer moves them. They're not able to help in moving themselves. So what ends up happening is the truck pulls away that they're using for cover, and it leaves McKay and Collins out in the open on this road, basically without any protection, and they're down. More cops start showing up, and they're going to start trying to surround this cabin. They've got these downed officers out in the open that they need to deal with. And a couple guys who are approaching in a truck realize that they're getting shot at, right? So they get out of their car and they start exchanging gunfire with Dorner in the cabin. And at some point, they try to make a more concerted effort to do this downed officer rescue. It's 2 SWAT guys. As I understand it, they had smoke available to them. And this is something that we'll take a little bit of a tangent about in a second, but I want to make sure that we continue with the story a little bit before we do. These 2 deputies figure out that these officers are down. We need to go rescue them. One of them throws smoke. They throw it towards the cabin, and the cabin, the wind direction does not really make the smoke very effective. It blows away from it. It doesn't have the desired effect. Fortunately, he has another round of smoke he's able to throw and obscure the view of the downed officers from Dorner in the cabin. At that point, they're able to sprint out, grab a hold of each of the 2 downed officers, Deputy McKay and Detective Collins, and they're able to drag them 25 to 50 yards back to a point of cover where they're able to render care and ultimately get them out of being exposed. Now, I want to talk about smoke, because smoke is a potentially very valuable tool, but it has significant limitations. It's an obscurant, right? It doesn't stop bullets. It's concealment, not cover. Someone who doesn't care about where their rounds are going can just fire into the smoke. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. The only thing it really does from the professional law enforcement side of it is, if that happens and bullets are coming through the smoke, you can't really shoot back, because if you can't see your target, you shouldn't be firing into it, right? So there's a potential for it to do more harm than good. The other big limitation is sometimes you think it's going to give you more concealment than it will, right? Depending on the wind, you might throw it and the wind direction causes it to dissipate really quick or blow in the wrong direction. And it has a limited payload, right? Like only so much smoke comes out of one canister. And so for it to really be effective, you probably need a lot in many cases, depending on the environment. So it worked in this case, but it's just something to think about. Like, this isn't something that, we've got some smoke and so we're good. You have to practice and train with that. Now, on the plus side, there's a psychological component to it. And Dorner had been very deliberate about his shots, right? He was targeting, he was taking aim when he was firing. He wasn't just, doing the kind of over the shoulder spray and pray kind of thing. He was actually taking aim and targeting his, shooting at what he was aiming at. So it was probably effective in getting him to not shoot because he couldn't see what he was shooting at. And potentially that meant he was trying to maneuver and find another shot or wait for another opportunity. And so it worked in this case, but you have to really understand the pluses and minuses before you do it. But in this case, they were able to get the smoke close enough to the cabin to obscure his view. And the two SWAT deputies were able to run out and drag McKay and Collins that distance to safety. Now, this is another thing. When you train for tactical medical scenarios where you're taking fire and you have downed or wounded, you have casualties. We've done entire episodes that talk about trauma care. I'm not going to rehash all of that, okay? But the one thing that I'm going to talk about here is that moving casualties is a lot of work. And it's great if you have a really neat first aid kit, right? And you carry all this tactical, I've got my little, IFAC and tourniquets and gauze and all these things. But a lot of times, especially if things are tactical, it's about security and using cover and concealment. And in this case, they had to run over, probably wearing a bunch of gear, and drag guys carrying a bunch of gear, holding a bunch of gear, a significant distance in like the snow. Think about how much physical work and exertion that is, and being able to still get a gun up, return fire, be proficient, right? There's a huge physical fitness preparedness component to this. So make sure that you're factoring that into your training. And I think it would be in your best interest if you think you might find yourself in a scenario like that, you need to set up some drills and some exercises and some scenarios where you have to really test yourself in that regard. How are you going to move people? It's a big deal. So in the aftermath of that, I mentioned that Deputy McKay was killed. Collins survives. He takes a round to his chest, which was actually stopped by his phone, of all things. And he lives. So now they're dealing with Dorner barricaded in this cabin. Now that initial gunfight, it was about 10 minutes or so of, sustained gunfighting. 10 minutes of fire, and then it kind of slowed down a little bit. They were able to start locking down the cabin, resupplying ammo. They got that rescue coordinated and started to get more resources en route. There was a few officers that were pinned down in places, but generally speaking, it started to stabilize a little bit. The deputies were able to confirm with the property owner that there was no one else supposed to be there. He didn't have hostages or anything like that weren't innocent people. It should just be Dorner inside by himself. They also learned that the cabin had a basement, which was something they were going to have to contend with at some point. But essentially, this turns into like a barricaded suspect type of operation, and San Bernardino County SWAT gets involved. They work on a gas plan. They fill the place with gas, and doesn't really go anywhere. And they start to bird cage the house. Now, bird caging is kind of a term that we use locally. I don't know if that's a popular term, but essentially it's trying to pick apart as much of the house from the outside as you can. It means, you're taking out windows, walls if necessary, so that you can kind of, rather than being trapped inside the house, you can clear it from the outside. So they start kind of knocking out doors and windows, using armor, and where applicable, taking out parts of walls to be able to look inside with either electronics or robotics or magnification, whatever, to try to figure out where this guy might be, where he's holed up, and how they can attack this, right? Get an idea for the layout, those sorts of things. Around 4:05 in the afternoon, so remember, this original thing, this chase started shortly after noon. 12:23 was that 911 call from the couple that got tied up in their condo. And so we're about 4 hours into this now. By the time he gets spotted on the hill, he crashes a car, he carjacks another one, he gets in a shootout, and then ultimately gets found at the cabin. Around 4:05, as they're bird caging this place, they see green smoke. And they're like, well, that's weird. And so the theory is essentially that Dorner had his own smoke canister that he popped, and apparently, or presumably maybe thought that officers were going to be making entry. And so he was probably trying to conceal his movement and get to some position of advantage, something like that. But the key thing in that is it told them that he was alive, right? That he hadn't been shot in the, and killed in the gun battle, and that he was still in there and he was still alive, which is a big deal. So with that, and with options starting to dwindle, they decide to throw burning munitions into the house. So there's different types of gas that we can use, and some of these gas rounds burn their payload, and they pose a fire risk. If you remember, we talked about the Waco incident where they started to tear gas that place, and there were some fires started, and it was unclear if the Branch Davidians inside the Waco structure started the fire, or if it was a result of the gas and not having an escape plan for the people inside, something along those lines. It's hard to say. We're not here to settle that, but just understanding that some of these burning munitions, we've learned the hard way over the years, pose a fire risk. That being said, they were kind of low on options. This guy has proven that he's committed. He's proven that he's not surrendering. And so they need to get him out of there somehow, right? And so they start using these more risky munitions to try to burn him out with gas. And I say burn him out, no pun intended there. But as it happens, it starts a fire and he never comes out. Ultimately, the place burns to the ground and he's inside. Now, there's a gunshot heard in there. And so at one point they said, we heard a gunshot. Maybe he self-inflicted, but they also heard ammunition detonating in the fire. And it wasn't discovered until the autopsy that he had a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, probably at some point before he burned. He burned, though. Nonetheless, they were able to confirm his identity using dental records and DNA. They were also able to match the ballistics of the guns that he had inside with the other shootings, so they knew that they had their guy. That is the end of the Dorner saga. Now, as far as some commentary goes, there was a lot of consternation and criticism over the decision to use burning munitions and to essentially burn him out alive, right? Now, that's not something that obviously any law enforcement agency should take lightly, in terms of de-escalating and things like that. But I want to just talk about the criticism a little bit, because what the critics said is basically like, well, why not wait him out? Why not just, he's not going anywhere. He's trapped in there, right? Like, why not just hold tight and let time do its thing? And that's a reasonable argument, right? For someone who hasn't been there. I think it's a good conversation to have and say like, well, we can wait him out and he can't get away. And then we can hold him accountable and let the criminal justice system hold him accountable and essentially make him answer for his crimes. Not that he's going to give any answers. That's quote unquote the right thing to do, right? It's easy to say that from the outside looking in. But you got to think about what these guys have been through. And the thing about it is a barricade operation where you think you're just going to keep this guy contained and wait him out for potentially, hours and hours or maybe days. I mean, where does that end, right? These guys have been in a gunfight over the last several hours. They've been in car chases over the last several hours. Some of them have been wounded and killed. This guy has obviously has access to equipment and weapons that at this point probably didn't leave the SWAT team, outgunned by any stretch, but certainly they're not dealing with your everyday criminal. He's used smoke. He's using suppressed rifles, and he knows what he's doing is important, right? He's got some military background, some law enforcement background. Like, there's a lot to think about here, and going into hours of darkness is a concern, right? We don't know if this guy is going to try to sneak out of there somehow, poke a hole in containment. We don't know if the officers are getting fatigued and eventually, they're not going to be on their A game. Relief might be hard to come by because this is a pretty manpower intensive operation. I'm assuming these guys haven't eaten. They're probably low on water. It's cold because there's snow. I mean, maintaining that operational state is hazardous in and of itself. Taking out the mission itself of dealing with the guy, right, of dealing with Dorner, just being out there in the elements presents a hazard and a challenge. Not to mention the day that some of these people have had. If you think about use of force rules and all the things that we have to factor into use of force decisions, we've checked all the reasonable boxes. We've made, presumably at this point, they've made announcements calling for him to surrender. They've tried to use less lethal means like tear gas. They've done a lot to try to resolve this another way, and he's not shown any desire to engage in constructive dialogue, to talk about and negotiate things for a peaceful surrender, to be de-escalated. Like, he's in this. He's, and by his own words in his manifesto, like he mentioned somewhere in his manifesto, he apologized to like the director of The Hangover about not being able to see The Hangover 3. Like, he was going to miss it because he was going to be dead. Like, he planned on dying. This was clearly a suicide mission for him. That is a level of desperation that is not something you can otherwise reason with. And so from a legal perspective, and I'm not a lawyer or a judge or anything, but from a legal perspective, I think that if you use gas, burning munitions even, and try to get this guy out of his cabin, and he has a change in heart and decides to come out and surrender, then you've done your job in de-escalating, right? You've avoided killing him. And if the house does get set on fire and he, panics and comes out and gives up and he lives through it, we've de-escalated. But otherwise, we were going to shoot this guy, right? Like, let's make sure we're all on the same page, that if this guy put his head into a window and a sniper had a shot, like, they would have killed him, right? Like, they were going to shoot this guy. So in a large sense, like, he had that coming no matter what. And this was just the means to that end. And really, it gave him the best chance of surrendering, was to try to like do it on our terms, right? So, yeah, I don't know how most people feel about the criticism, but I think what they did was pretty reasonable, and that's just Mike talking here. That's it's worth what you paid for it, that opinion. But I think they were reasonable, and I think there's a pretty huge dose of F that guy going on up in that house. So it's something to think about. So the viewing for Michael Crane's service was supposed to end that night while they were all up on the cabin. And a bunch of Michael Crane's, he was the Riverside officer who was killed, and his funeral was going to be the next day. Michael Crane's wife, had a bunch of friends of his come to the viewing. They got there late. It was after 8 o'clock at night, and they were, still a mess. They still had face paint on their faces from this, big gun battle thing. And they're like, hey, we got him, and it's over. And what a sigh of relief over all the stuff, all the turmoil that had gone on over the past, week and a half of this event, prior to this officer's funeral, ultimately, that happened. And it kind of put this whole thing to rest. So in the aftermath of this, we had Deputy Jeremiah McKay, who was killed. We had Officer Michael Crane, Riverside PD, who was killed. And we had the couple in Irvine that were killed. Monica and her fiance, Keith. Randall Kwan was the attorney. It was Randall Kwan's daughter, Monica, and her fiance, who were killed. So those 4 people were killed. Dorner was obviously killed, and you had a few other deputies and officers who were wounded during the course of all of this. But that is the Dorner story in a nutshell. Pretty crazy, pretty intense. Talk about a no-sleep week for law enforcement in Southern California, but a lot of stuff to think about. You could think about the emergency planning. What would you do if there was some credible threat and you couldn't go home? What do you do with your family? What do you do with stuff you need from the house? What do you do with the pets? Like, what's that look like? What if you are given a protective detail and then like the guy doesn't turn up, and so they finally cut the resources and you're on your own? Do you have a plan for that? And that's just a safety plan that is probably something most people would never have to consider. But, if you're Teresa Evans, you probably didn't really spend a whole lot of your time having to worry about that like most normal people. And then suddenly, guess what? Today's the day that you're getting those phone calls. So that's something to think about. Workplace violence and warning signs with Dorner, and some of the cues or indicator that he might be trouble. That's a big thing to think about. Counter ambush. This guy was doing these deliberate near ambushes where there's really no option in a near ambush other than to fight through it, right? To get quote unquote off the X or fight your way off the X, and overwhelming violence is the way that you survive a near ambush. That's it, right? Counter ambush tactics in a far ambush, which would probably describe something more like the cabin scenario, where you're taking fire from a distance and you need to move to cover and kind of do a tactical withdraw and reapproach that another way. But those are both things that, again, we're not going to deep dive into this episode, but it's one of the things that if you might be confronted with this sort of thing, you need to kind of differentiate in your head: near ambush versus far ambush. Tactical medicine. Tactical medicine is something that we've done whole episodes about, but think about things like self-aid, taking care of rendering your own treatment, affecting an officer rescue. If you are going to put yourself out there to go drag somebody to safety, do a remote assessment. Look from a distance and determine, is that person even viable? Is it worth the risk? Or am I going to create additional casualties by going out there? They might not be in the right state of mind. Can they help themselves? If I call out to them, if I throw them equipment, can they put on their own gauze or tourniquets or whatever? Can they move themselves to safety if I coach them through it? And if we are going to make a rescue, that's not something that you just go out and do. That's something that you have to have a clear plan. You talk about, you take a hot second and say, hey, you're going to do this, I'm going to do that. Do you have questions? Are we on the same page, right? Don't do something that falls short and gets only kind of half executed in the case of the truck getting pulled away and leaving them exposed. So there's some tactical medicine lessons in there. And then there's some philosophical use of force stuff. Is it reasonable to set this guy's house on fire for all intents and purposes? I think it was. I think they checked every box that was reasonable for them to do, and that there was no need for them to let this go into hours of darkness when they were already going to be fatigued and exposed to the elements and at a disadvantage from this guy. But again, those are questions that you probably want to consider before you find yourself in a scenario like that. In the Dallas incident where several Dallas officers were shot, which we'll debrief at some point. That's one that's on our list. But they sent the Dallas PD sent a robot with explosives strapped to it to kill that guy. Was that reasonable? Yeah, I mean, I think it was, but unconventional, sure, and not a decision to be taken lightly by any stretch. And then the final thing really that I have on this is just when tensions are high, you still have to be professionals. And now I'm talking about the misidentifications of Dorner in Torrance, where LAPD and Torrance PD were involved in shootings that probably should have never happened. You know, I get it. I'm empathetic to tensions being high and everyone being on edge, but it's no excuse. Can't happen. Can't happen. We can't have innocent people getting wounded by law enforcement because you're scared, right? Like Jim likes to say, a scared cop is a dangerous cop. That's a no-go, hard no-go. So we got to prevent those things. And, you know, how do we get there? How do we prevent that, right? Well, I think a lot of it is just professionalism is not something that just happens in a vacuum. You've got to be proficient. You've got to be inoculated to stress. If manhunting is your thing, then you've got to be poised to deal with this kind of bad guy. You know, every agency, department, organization, you need to have a group of people who is able to handle that. And what made this hard is that this was so resource intensive that you had, you know, random, you know, officer snuffies that were getting involved in these things. And, you know, here's the deal. Like an active killer event, you know, that's not a SWAT team problem. That's a patrol cop problem, you know, and in a scenario like this, where it's all hands on deck, your lowest common denominator matters. So you don't get to send your A team when 70 or 100 people or however many people it ends up being need these protective details because them and their families are getting threatened. And they're just sending, it's all hands on deck, right? Like your baseline needs to be as prepared for this as they can be. And so that's why we really hate that lowest common denominator thing. You really need to think about ways that you can push the status quo and to raise that baseline, right? And there's a lot that goes into that, but you know, that's kind of my final thought on this. So that is the Christopher Dorner incident. I'm glad that is over. I remember it happening, and I remember doing the research for this episode, kind of seeing it through a different lens. It was definitely an eye-opener to think about now, because when it happened, I didn't have nearly as much experience as I do now in this kind of manhunting mission or dealing with people who have shot at the cops. I mean, just dealing with those people can be, you know, it could be scary, but like, that's what we do, right? It's what we get paid to do. So that's all I got on this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll have a lot more debriefs like this coming your way soon. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. Also by Dry Fire Mag. Dry Fire Mag solves the common and annoying problem of having to rack the slide every time you press the trigger in dry fire training. One of the bad habits it took me a long time to break was proper trigger follow through in dry fire. The Dry Fire Mag will help you eliminate that problem almost immediately. Go buy a Dry Fire Mag and double your training reps in just a few minutes a day at dryfiremag.com. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money is going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And if you're on Facebook, go join our podcast discussion group. There's lots of like-minded people in there you can interact with. Just go to the group tabs on our page and answer a couple questions. You'll be able to get in there and hang out with us. That's all we got. Good talk.